Hello, interwebs, and welcome to Jessie Gender After Dark, where nerds, sex, stuff. No, that's not good. That's a terrible. Alright, I'm still workshopping the slogan for this channel. Bear with me. I'd love to hear your thoughts about a slogan down in the down below. But beyond that, welcome to After Dark, the channel where I get to share my dorky, nerdy self and share all the things that I couldn't share anywhere else. And I get to nerd out with all of you. And for today's video, I'm just going to gush about one of my favorite shows on TV right now, For All Mankind, and review its recently wrapped up season 2. As many of you may know, I actually did a full analysis of the first season of For All Mankind over on my main channel, so check out that video. It should be up here somewhere, wherever that's gonna go. But honestly, I loved season 1 of For All Mankind, but going into season 2, I was not expecting them to up their game, but up their game they did. Almost every storyline and character and plot in this season of the show really just took everything that I loved about the first season and really just kept pushing it further and further and made it even more interesting, and took characters in ways that I honestly did not expect, and made characters that I ultimately kind of didn't really love in season 1, or kind of was at least mildly disinterested in, and actually made them some of the most dynamic and fascinating characters on the show. And then other characters that I already loved took them in just new directions that I was so surprised to see, and also easily gave me some of the best acting performances I have honestly seen in the past few years on TV. So let's just dive into this, because For All Mankind is absolutely great. For those of you who don't know, For All Mankind follows an alternate history where the Russians actually got to the moon first. And so the first season of the show is sort of following right after that. Like, the Russians got to the moon first in the 1960s, and everything's sort of happening after the fallout of that. This season of the show skipped ahead 10 years into the, I believe, the 70s, and sort of showed us where our characters were 10 years down the line, and how much the NASA program has sort of exploded outwards in a way that it never did in the real world, because of the competition that was ongoing with the Russians in this version of the world. And so NASA got a ton more funding, a ton more attention, because they were seen as actually competing with the Russians, as opposed to just sort of like being something that became defunct after a time in our own world, and kept on inspiring different elements of the world. And that's really where this show goes into. It was just so cool to see a sort of NASA that has gone on to do more things. Like, there is an actual moon base. Like, in the first season, there was just Jamestown Moon Base, which is this small cramped quarters thing. It was very claustrophobic. In fact, Gordo Stevens in that season was just got so much anxiety being up there because of how close quarters it was. Now there's a whole moon base with a ton of people on it. The program's expanded. They have all these new ships. They have a new, like, Sea Dragon type of space shuttle that's going into space, that's about to, like, this huge new jump forward in technology. And you can see how that's also affected the real world technology too. You see characters actually having cell phones way back in the 70s. So, like, this love and push for NASA and the technology that comes out of it actually influences, like, small subtle things. And I like seeing the little bits of world building that go on in the background of just, like, small changes to the world and tweaks that we see to the world because of this one small change of the Russians getting to the moon first, like, again, with the cell phone thing. But where this show really, really shines is on the backs of its performers and its characters. And honestly, I'm just going to gush right up front about my favorite performances this season, and that is Edward Baldwin, played by Joel Kinnaman, and Karen Baldwin, played by, I'm just going to check, Chantel Van Staten, is how I think you say her name. Both of them were fantastic, and I do not say that lightly. Joel Kinnaman, I have to say, he's never been an actor that I've disliked. I mean, I enjoyed him in Altered Carbon, but he always seemed to be a kind of fairly one-note actor in my book, not having all that much range. Kind of in that Gerald Butler sort of side of things, where he's just like a very, conventionally attractive-looking guy who just can be, like, tough and awesome, but nothing much beyond that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. He played that well in everything I saw him in, but not much range beyond that. But he proved me wrong with his performance of Edward Baldwin in this season. He's definitely playing that sort of, like, very closed off, not emotional man throughout the season, but you really get the sense that there is a lot of emotion going on underneath the surface in almost every scene that he is in. Like, he has managed to portray a man who does not like to show his emotions, but he is feeling things really deep down. And nowhere is that more shown in his relationship and scenes with Karen Baldwin this season. There is one episode in this season, I think it's episode 3, where I don't want to spoil too much for those of you who haven't seen it, but there is a family breakdown where, Ed just comes home, he seems all happy and normal, and Karen shares some news with him about their adoptive daughter and a choice that their adoptive daughter has made. And instantaneously you see Joel Kinnaman just break down so quickly in that scene. He goes from just perfectly normal man to a man just shocked, to a man just lashing out in anger, to a man that is taken aback by his own actions in the past few minutes and the outburst of emotion. And Joel Kinnaman just plays that all so beautifully. It's written beautifully, but the performance just shocked me. And Karen Baldwin, played by Van Satin, she also just matches him beat for beat in every scene that she's in. She is able to push back against him, but also comes across as like understanding and someone who wants to like explore her own boundaries. Karen was a character in season 1 who I honestly kind of hated. I found her annoying. She was very much a Karen. She was like, Karen was a Karen in season 1. Let's like make no bones about that. But in season 2, you really see that she sort of understandably evolved because of all the events that happened to her and the death of a certain family member in season 1. And you really see she sort of started to break out of her shell, and she honestly became a character that you can see that she's still a little bit stuck up at times, but she's so much grown as a person, and you really believe the evolution. And just her performance throughout the season 2 was just phenomenal, especially every scene she had with Ed, but even the scenes that she had on her own with her daughter, their adoptive daughter, who was also played really brilliantly. I loved their dynamic with their daughter throughout the season. You could really just see that she was so thoughtful and heartwarming. So I cannot gush about those two enough, but I have to kind of move on. The other two performances that I really loved this season were both Gordo Stevens and Tracy Stevens. Both those characters were fan-freaking-tastic as well. Gordo, like I said, he was a character I really started off disliking season 1, but by the end of season 1, I really came to love him and his struggle and the things that he was dealing with, the emotion or like PTSD that he was dealing with throughout the season. And this season, his depression and him pulling himself out of this depression and then sort of like going after Tracy again, it felt really, again, very believable and honest to me that this is something that he would have wanted and he would have felt like. And that's saying something too, because I really feel like, oh, well, the man's going to chase after the woman character that he's really in love with and wants to earn her back sort of thing, after he was kind of like a cheating jerk. That storyline can become very like male fantasy-esque, but it felt real here. It felt nuanced. It felt like he understood the mistakes that he had made, and he actually made efforts to improve on them. The journey felt earned, as opposed to just sort of this being this male fantasy, like, well, he's gonna get over his PTSD and he's gonna get the girl back. It didn't really feel like that in any way. And Tracy, for her part, you really felt her character as well going in an unexpected direction. She was such an earnest character in season 1 of the show, and in season 2, she's sort of become a celebrity astronaut and kind of a little bit full of herself and distant from people around her. And you really start to see that she's kind of lost track of what was important to her, and sort of seeing that journey throughout the show, and then sort of it mirroring her being able to sort of find love again with Gordo, was just really heartwarming and beautiful to see. And just seeing these two characters on different tracks and having separate storylines, but eventually coming back together in a beautiful way, and ultimately, without spoiling the finale of the season, such a heartbreaking way, was fantastic. I adored their entire storylines this season between both of them. Also, I have to talk about how this show addressed some of its minority cast members and characters this season, because I really thought that they did a great job addressing sort of like issues that were inherent of the time in the 70s, but showing like how this version of history could be made better, but still was struggling with those issues. Danielle Poole being the one that I'm sort of thinking of most. She was a black woman in the NASA program before, black women in actual history got to really be recognized as astronauts in the space program. Now, black women were always part of the space program in some way, shape, or form, as we saw in the movies like Hidden Figures and stuff like that. But Danielle Poole in this season of the show, I loved the scene where she goes to Ed and says, like, it's not good enough. Look at that list. Look at all the people that have got to lead missions. None of them are black women. Why is that so? And it's not good enough. And it really felt like the show, like, being able to like stand on its soapbox a little bit, but making it feel real because it was coming from an emotional place with a specific character. It didn't feel like the show beating me over the head with its message, but really felt like it was taking this individual idea, the struggle that this individual character was having, but making it feel like it fit within a larger social political context and what those social political contexts meant and symbolized to so many people throughout the United States, which we've seen in so many different things, even in the past few years, about how important representation is and how much it needs to have an ally stand up and say, like, no, this is what needs to happen. But the show never ever, like, sort of glossing over all the problems with that. Like, she goes to Edward Baldwin and says to Ed, you need to do this. This needs to happen. And then Ed goes into a meeting and stands up for the same thing, and he kind of gets all the credit for being like, oh, look, I helped a black woman become the leader of the mission. And he doesn't, like, brag about it or anything, but you sort of see that sort of, like, her contribution was very important, but sometimes doesn't get seen seen, even though she was the one really pushing for this. And so I really loved that. I really loved her like sort of standing up for herself throughout this entire season too, like at the end of the show where she chooses to minor spoilers, she chooses to do the handshake moment on the with the Russian ship. Really great. And I love seeing that inspired a ceasefire in the Cold War going on, that it was slowly escalating. How NASA can inspire, again, that idea of like individual actions become symbolic of larger issues and can inspire and push forward even beyond just the individual thing that it was, and space sort of being this big sort of broad brush of what humanity can be both positive and negative within the show. And speaking of that, the politics of this season were absolutely wonderful. I love seeing the escalation of the Cold War and how the sort of like militarization and sort of, heightening the heating up of the Cold War sort of brought onto the moon, with the militarization and military members being added to the moon, and the back and forth there, and sort of like accidental deaths that go on the moon, and how that keeps escalating and rises political tension. I love all of that stuff. All fantastic, to a shocking finale. I cannot gush about the finale enough. The final episode of this season with the Russians invading Jamestown base, truly just tense all the way throughout, and all the stuff like a nuclear meltdown was happening. Gordo and Tracy having to go outside and turn off the nuclear meltdown in duct tape suits without actual pressure suits was heartbreaking. How that wound up. The political stakes of all that and the Cold War tensions rising, absolutely just phenomenal. Also, two smaller characters who didn't get as much to do this season, but were still standouts. Margot and Molly, fantastic. I love Molly having to be like this, like, again, this sort of cocksure person, not super emotional person, but having to deal with the deterioration of her body because of a choice that she makes in the very first episode of the season. And sort of like her struggle with that, and her fear of that, and her fear of losing the ability to see. It felt very real, felt very, I understood every beat and her tension and her fear and her worry, and ultimately her choice at the end of the season where she chooses to not pursue this like very risky surgery in order to stay with her husband. You feel that weight on her and that choice that she had to make, and it was so just unexpected, that journey for her, but felt like, again, the unexpected way to take this character, to take this very like headstrong person and place them in this sort of like space where they have to wrestle with losing everything that they define themselves by and become an administrator, was just really just a great turn for that character. Margot as well, seeing Margot to get to have a little bit of a romance this season was really wonderful, and sort of like dealing with some of the frustrations of being the head of NASA was just really nice to see, and sort of dealing with the militarization of her program, and sort of like seeing the military become more prominent in her program, I thought was just really great. Again, her romance was adorable. I do feel like some of the stuff between Margot and Alita, who was the character from season 1, felt a little bit forced. I like Alita quite a lot. I like her being sort of a headstrong woman too, and sort of coming into her own this season, and sort of like having her own emotional problems, but I don't feel like it ever felt fully developed as much to me, and so I wish there had been a little bit more time devoted to that, but ultimately it kind of was one thing that got sort of left off to the side. So that was one thing that I did want to see a little bit more of. And the other character, Ellen. Ellen was also wonderful this season. It was really nice to see a LGBTQ character get to like be kind of a jerk as the season went on. Like, I understood every beat of her character evolution as she becomes more of an administrator. She starts to become like more like, all right, I'm going to become more of the president's girl, become more wrapped up in the politics because she's really good at being an administrator. And I liked seeing that, but she was ultimately someone who, even though I liked her character in season 1, I came to like really kind of be frustrated with her by the end of the season, but in a way that like felt true to her character and never felt annoying, which is always a hard balance with characters like this. You always have to walk this line between like, is the character going to be annoying if we make her too like of a jerk, but it all felt really believable. And the sacrifices that she had to make, like the sacrifice, like her wanting to pursue having a romance with her former lover, but ultimately not being able to be out with it because they are both gay in a time where being gay wasn't accepted, and ultimately the sacrifice that has to happen there because she becomes a more of a career-focused person, and her lover sort of ending up choosing to leave her to help benefit her because she really could become a really big political figure one day. It ultimately felt very true but heartbreaking. And that's the thing that I have to say most about this show as I sort of wrap out this review. For All Mankind is a show that, for all of its craziness and for all of its like really pushing what like this alternate history idea, it never loses sight of making it all feel believable and real. Every choice, every moment, every extrapolation, no matter how extreme they get, especially towards the end of the season, I all felt like it came out of real situations and real character development. There was never any jumps in characters, never any jumps in logic, never any jumps in the story, but it just escalated to unexpected places, strange places that I didn't expect the story to go, and yet I was able to follow it every beat of the way, and it made me ask real questions about what would this mean if we got to have this in our real world? What would it mean if we got to have these like small individual moments of inspiration that inspired us and brought us all together through our shared faults of humanity? Like, we're all faulty humans, and yet we can create these beautiful moments within all of that, within these messy politics and messy personal stuff. We can do great things. And that's ultimately what I love about this show, is that it shows messy humans being messy and yet still doing feats of beauty and inspiration beyond that, in a sci-fi setting, which also makes me happy, and with really cool politics, which I also find very fun, because you all know me, I like talking about fictional politics. So ultimately, this show, behind maybe The Expanse, and after this season, it might even be up there with The Expanse, this might be my favorite science fiction show currently running. I cannot recommend enough. Please go check out season 2 of For All Mankind. Absolutely wonderful, and I cannot recommend it enough. But I'd love to hear what all of you thought down in the comments below about For All Mankind Season 2. Don't forget, since this is the new channel, please don't forget to subscribe, because I'd love to help build this channel, help build it out. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my main channel, Jessie Gender, where I talk about social and political issues in like video essay formats over there. I also have a Patreon page where you can support me. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and stay sexy.